Hannah Arendt returns to the Midway. This photograph was taken in 1965, probably right across the street. If you see the full photograph, it's in a classroom. It was taken by Lotta Kohler, a lifelong friend of hers. And I show this everywhere that I speak, but it's so delightful to show it here. It really is so important. So I call this drawing history. And the visual, the year of the visual. So let's go through it in 7 steps. But I'm a cartoonist, so 7 is a little mushy. So don't count too closely. I start with this quote, which is from Hannah herself. And for any of you who are PhD academic philosophers, forgive me for referring to her as Hannah. I lived so closely, she was in my head for 3 years. We were on a first-name basis. Storytelling reveals meaning without committing the error of defining it. And it's a typical Arendtian phrase. You can unpack it and look at it time and time again. But any of us who live or love stories appreciate it. And this was a quote that I kept over my desk as I was working on this. There's the book, taking off. So what is it? What is that? Is it a graphic novel? It's not a novel. It's not made up. Novels are made up. Is it a graphic biography? Well, there are some graphic parts in it. Not too many. I think it's to aid character, but it's not really that. Is it a comic book? It's not really a comic book. It's more expensive than comic books. Comic books are getting pretty expensive, but no, it's not a comic book. They are. It's a comics biography. People like Chris Ware, who's going to be speaking here tomorrow, and a local resident, and Art Spiegelman, the author of Mouse, and many other people, this category, this genre is referred to as comics. I think it's great. So it's a comics biography. But it's really more than that. It's a biopic. And a biopic is a very problematic term. It's a guilty pleasure for a lot of people, but it is a biopic. This is a biopic. This was Warner Brothers, First National. The story of Dr. Ehrlich's magic bullet. Anybody know the film? Okay, great. We won't quiz you on it, but it does run on TCM occasionally. Patton is a biopic. Francis Ford Coppola wrote it. It's an interesting story about General George S. Patton, not the nicest fellow in the world, good movie. Amadeus is a biopic. It's about Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, as you know, told through the lens of Salieri, his rival. But really, to me, as I was working on this and trying to figure out how to address it, this film inspired me. Aguirre, Wrath of God, directed and written by Werner Herzog. Herzog is a huge inspiration to me, but there was something about this film when I saw it at Facets, I think, when I was in high school, that turned me on in a very interesting way. And as I got to study and learn more, I came up with this thing that Herzog actually discussed in a lecture with Roger Ebert that he called ecstatic truth, and I love that. Ecstatic truth. I love the combination of those words, and I instantly understood it in a way that didn't define it. Herzog says, fact creates norms, truth creates illumination. He adds, there are deeper strata of truth in cinema, and personally I would add in graphic novels and comics, things. And there is such a thing as poetic, ecstatic truth. It is mysterious and elusive and can be reached only through fabrication and imagination and stylization. So if you think about storytelling that's true or nonfiction, those are really powerful words. Walter Benjamin, who figures in almost everything, who was a great philosopher and a great friend of Hannah Arendt's, which figures in the book, said, the chronicler, who recounts events without distinguishing between the great and the small, thereby accounts for the truth that nothing which has ever happened is to be given as lost to history. So this is really interesting to me. And the connections are great because this comes from his On the Philosophy of History, which he actually gave to Hannah Arendt as she was going to try and escape Europe, and he went to his doom in the Pyrenees. Hannah Arendt says, like a pearl diver who dives to the bottom of the sea to pry loose the rich and the strange, this kind of historical thinking delves into the depths of the past to bring them up to the world of the living as thought fragments, as something rich and strange. So all of this stuff as a visual storyteller is like giving me the green light. So what do I call it? It's a time machine. That's what I made. Okay, finding her face. Talk about the year of the graphic and visuals. There's a photo of her. I can kind of, I used a lot of visual reference as I was doing this to kind of get information that's different than you might get in traditional. And you can just picture her. I mean, we used to live in New York. I think that just looks like upstate New York. I think I recognize the tree. You know, just her pose, the cock of her head, the necklace, the high-waisted pants. I mean, we take in so much information visually, especially faces. I knew this was going to be really important, and I was both blessed and cursed with somebody that had an incredible face. Sucked. I'm going into the realm of my false starts. One of the things I'm going to show you in this talk is the mistakes that I made. That was terrible. That was luckily I didn't throw them away. Terrible. Horrible. So I'm like, okay, I got to go back to the drawing board. There she is. Oh, young. Okay, she's a college student in Germany in the 20s. Very striking. I mean, and again, what I start sucking up and what I start inhaling as I'm doing are the nuances. This necklace, which appears, I think she kept it throughout her life, is like a kind of a very interesting, like a Tibetan kind of a hippie necklace or something. You can't see the cigarette, the sweater, but the face, the eyes. I'm getting a lot of information from this that's real information. Here's another shot of hers that I found. I mean, that is not the typical vision that many of us would have of Hannah Arendt, but the face, again, everything, the angles, the hair, the leg up on the balcony. And that's got to be Berlin. I mean, it just has to be. No place else has balconies like that. I'd never been to Berlin, but I mean, look at that. Look at her. But it all comes together. Horrid. I mean, I was like, oh my God. But I'm struggling. I'm studying her intellectual story, but I'm trying to find her visual story. So this cropped up in my research, and thank goodness they have invented this thing called the internet. And this was her naturalization papers. She was stateless for 18 years. She fled Germany in 1933 without a passport and didn't get one until the early 50s. That's what I call an industrial photograph. That's like a driver's license photograph. She's gorgeous. Sorry. I mean, her hair, her makeup, her attitude. So all of a sudden, these non-posed things are starting to do some stuff for me. So then I did a bigger sketch of her, trying to capture her attitude. And this was helping me get into who she was. And then, thanks to the fact that the librarians in France never throw anything away, this pops up on my Facebook feed in January 5th, I think, of 2017. And they found her library card at the Bibliothèque Nationale. So cool, right? I mean, it blew me away. I'm like, you got to be kidding me, because I'm in the middle of trying to do a graphic novel about her, and now there's some new information that has never been seen. This is from December 14th of 39. So this immediately went alongside that quote over my desk, and this was my Hannah. This is her, like she'd never been seen, and she looks different here. And again, it's an industrial photograph, but who goes to take a driver's license picture and says, no, I'm going to do a little three-quarter looking off into space? I mean, I'm getting information from this. A long neck, aquiline, almost a razor-sharp nose, but the attitude. Also this sort of color and the way she looks, but she's tired. And by now I know that in her biography, her days in Paris were really long days. She'd spend the morning trying to get Jewish kids out of Europe for the Jewish Aliyah. She'd go to the Bibliothèque Nationale and fight with Walter Benjamin, trying to solve the mysteries of the universe in the afternoon. And at night, she had to go home to her second husband, who wasn't Jewish, and her mother, who didn't like him, and they had to live in a little apartment and repeat day after day after day. She was tired. But all of a sudden, this started giving me some information that started to work for the image. I love this one. I did a talk to some German scholars yesterday. Somebody put, "I love Goethe," etched that into the... but here she is in college. So you can start seeing she's in Königsberg. And now I can kind of do her like pretty regularly in just all sorts of different ages. So it's really a matter of finding the way the eyebrows, the nose, the mouth, the architecture of the face kind of hung together to give that right thing, and also the green, the green color, which I'll come back to. So why Hannah? I had questions. I always have questions. But I had questions. One, why did this person, arguably one of the greatest philosophers of the 20th century, and as long as we're here, I'll say the greatest, renounce philosophy? Why did she renounce it? And did she really renounce it? What's the life behind the thinking? This is, I think, for a biographer, this is always, and any of us who read biographies or even talk to other people, we want to learn from stories like, what's your life like? A photograph. Again, when I discovered this, come on, you'd have to be like, look at that. I mean, I imagine it's here. I don't know, maybe it's at Princeton or maybe these are all lovely men. They're wearing ties. Oh, there she is. And look at her attitude, and look at her coat, and she's the only one wearing white and her shoe. I'm just like, oh my God, this is amazing. But it was a huge question. Another question, how could she be so freaking cool? To hang out with the likes of everyone from Bertolt Brecht, right, the great German playwright and poet, Walter Benjamin, who we spoke about, Marlene Dietrich, who you all know, as a great movie star and a hero, Marc Chagall, Billy Wilder, Samuel Wilder, who went on to direct The Apartment, Double Indemnity, and so on and so forth, greatest comic director and writer, W.H. Auden, the poet, Saul Bellow, another local fella, Randall Jarrell, who I discovered along the way, an incredible critic and poet, Mary McCarthy, and on and on and on. And these are just the people, like a quick, nuanced thing of the people that you know. The people who you may not be top of mind are amazing. Hannah Hoch, a German woman artist who invented the art of collage. I mean, the people who hung out, like incredible. Okay, but why a comics biography of Hannah? Okay, this woman who writes the doorstopper philosophical books. So in writing a biography, we have a major problem. And in reading one, but certainly in writing one. We're stupid. We are stupid. Why are we stupid? We're stupid because we know the ending. We know what's going to happen. Abe Lincoln is going to get shot, and it's going to be really bad. George Washington will cross the Delaware and get wooden teeth. Whatever, Ron Chernow's doing incredible things. We discover new things, Grant, and so on and so forth. But if you know the ending of a story, it's not as good, kind of. I mean, it makes it hard. It takes away suspense. So I thought back to those long afternoons at my home when I was a kid up in Deerfield, luxuriating over a stash that I had inherited from my dad's cousin. And this is part 2 of my guilty pleasure, Classics Illustrated. Now, among the comics cognoscenti, of whom Chris Ware is a god of mine, I don't think he's going to dig Classics Illustrated, but I did, because I inherited about 22 of them. And I read them over and over and over. You know, they were great. Now, the ones I got also included some of the longer volumes, thicker ones, on such subjects as the wonders of atomic energy, but really weird ones too, like the life of Joan of Arc. And they were beautiful. Benjamin Franklin. So you can see here, when I was a kid, I called that Kaiser's conquest. I didn't know what that was. But you can see, even in this cursory glance, something happens with the history when you see pictures. So for me, I realized that comics are really the perfect tool for scraping the barnacles off of history. You know how boats have all those barnacles? And that's what history is. History comes to us with barnacles. We all think we know everything. And Spiegelman actually validated my when I was a 12-year-old feelings when he said, comics are the art of turning time back into space. And Chris, who's brilliant, said, cartooning recreates on the page some sixth sense of space and of being in a body in a way no other medium can quite so easily, or at least so naturally. Comics, in some ways, are already structurally more synesthetic, more multi-sensual than text-only writing, with their combination of pictures and words, inducing a flowing sense of movement and sound, and sometimes even smell. We're visual creatures. You know, if you're 1,000 feet from someone and you see them kind of like, we've all done this, you can kind of get a sense of who they are. And how many of us have then walked to just check that person out, and we get close to them, we go, yeah, I knew you were like that. We're visualists. So for me, geography is destiny. And by that I mean space and architecture and setting, because I get to put those pictures in my things. So here's the town where Hannah grew up, Königsberg. It no longer exists. It's gone. One of the most brutal battles of World War II was fought there, flattened. It's now called Kaliningrad. Americans can't go there. It figures in my first thing. We introduce it. Königsberg, East Prussia, 1912. Here she is. And you can see she even had big bushy eyebrows as a little child. Okay, this is the Café Romanisch in Berlin. There. That's where everybody hung out. I mean, if you look into histories of Weimar Germany, everybody went there. Really cool looking place. No longer there, flattened. That was it after the war. There's another shot of it. And I love the little trolley car in the corner, and I've seen a lot of shots of this eave. It kind of was like a place where people could have coffee. This was the inside. So I'm soaking up all this visual information to try and figure out what was it about this place where everybody hung out, including Billy Wilder, who said and was quoted, even when I started making enough money not to go there, I still went there. Men in hats with big cigars, reading newspapers. It's a different world. So when I introduce the section on her going to Berlin, I say the Romanisch. And I show these different shots, and I do this, and I introduce Berlin. So I do the research too. So I used Google Maps to find her house, 130 Morningside Drive. I used to live on the Upper West Side, and I wanted to see what it was like. What was the light like there? What was the street like? What did she see every day? Where did she walk? It's a really great corner of New York. It bends around. You overlook all of Harlem. It's incredible. She got the best table at the Romanisch. She got the best real estate. I took this picture up at Columbia University, and I end up using this image a lot in the book because I imagine that her conferences with Salo Baron are there, and as they're discussing the attitude of the angel or whatever that is shifts in looking at her. Okay, so here's a few things that I learned along the way about drawing and about making these things. Immediacy. So these comic the experience of a comic, because of the pictures, it's immediate. It's like you experience it, you witness it. So here's a scene, and you can see this is me, a little thing of how I inked it in. And she's running home from school, and she sees a car, and the guy yells at her. And then there's like a flashback. Immanuel Kant also grew up in Königsberg. And I can do that. I can compress time in her flashback. And Kant, who was the great philosopher who was a huge inspiration on her throughout her life, I wonder if it was just because he was a local guy, that she liked him. But no, there were other reasons. Arendt believed that we learn about the world through actions, through what we witness. And that's also how we interact with comics. We witness them. And for Hannah, this is very important. Words are actions. Words are actions. Because anything that we can see between people in life is an action. And like Benjamin said, and I love this, she regarded truth as an exclusively acoustical phenomenon. It wasn't theoretical, it was what you say. This is pretty cool. And even though comics don't talk, they do, if you think about it. And all of you have looked at comics at one time or another. So here, this is a little scene. At 7 a.m., I go down for breakfast. I make a scene of the key being in the slot, putting my Athenian tragedy days. Your key, Madame Descartes. What do you mean, my key? Where the hell's my husband? He's not in the room. My door's unlocked. I've had it. I do not understand. Oh, yes, you do. You called the cops on him. I assure you, madame, nothing of the sort took place. I've had enough of this BS. I'm going to the precinct to fetch him. So we hear it. We know the convention of the balloon, right? And we hear it. Charlie Brown has a different voice. Steve Canyon has a different voice. Dick Tracy. Okay, but what about her thinking? This is where it gets really interesting, because her life and her thinking, my thing was, I was interested in her as a person. And one of the things that she did was come up with great thoughts. Just like if I'm going to read about Mozart, I'm interested in Mozart as a person who wrote like amazing music. So I was interested in the whole thing. So what were some of her thoughts? And these are just a few. Man does not inhabit the world. Man reaching for fire, man. No, men do, and women and children. Man does not. Plurality is everything. Now, she was a real language freak, so plurality to her, I have to kind of define sort of as in the public space, everyone must be heard and respected, everyone. This means equality is a prerequisite, not a byproduct. How you get to equality, it's your problem. But this is how it works. Thinking, really thinking, is all we can do, and it's all we must do. She called it thinking through. And there's actually a German word that describes this. There isn't one in English. Thinking through. Reality must be faced. Lies distort reality. What I say is they put the fingers on the scales of truth, and it's like that has disastrous results. It's like the old computer programming thing, garbage in, garbage out. Be a pariah. A pariah is an outsider who sees the truth and who speaks it. And she really, this goes back to her earliest days. She loved that outsider perspective. For a while, I thought of calling the book The Woman Who Bit the Hand That Fed Her. Luckily, I was dissuaded from doing that, so the book could be published. But it helped me get a sense of her personality, because I wanted to know who she was as a person, because I want you, the reader, to know who she is as a person, because I want her to come back. She gave up her love of a man for her love of the world. That is the Hollywood strapline, but that's also part of her personality. So I wanted to show her in all her dimensions. Eve Ensler, who wrote the Vagina Monologues, I was so honored that she wrote me this note. She was one of the most brilliant, radical, truth-seeking humans of this century, or maybe ever. She risked being a pariah in speaking her truth, and in this day of increasing political and techno mind control, I love that, she is a doorway. And I think that was a real good endorsement, because I wanted to bring her back. I can't, I mean, she passed away a long time ago, but I wanted to kind of get her back into the discussion. All right, so this section, oh, we're doing well on time. I'm just keep checking the time there. This section, so when you're writing a book, biography, you have hunches. And Hannah kept giving me gifts as I had hunches, and I was working on it, and I was digging in. So this is part of that diving for pearls. I'm looking for those senses. That's why we go visit the places where they lived. So here's some. So escapes, that was a nice gift. Helped me structure the book. So when 1933, she's translating Nazi propaganda into ancient Greek for the Zionists. And this is right after the Reichstag fire, and her husband splits because he's mentioned in Bertolt Brecht's diary, so he knows he's next on the list to get round up. And Hannah stays because she has a lot of compassion for what Zionists are doing. And she decides to put these translations into ancient Greek so no one can read them. The Nazis catch her and think it's a secret code and throw her in a Gestapo prison where she resides, and then she escapes. Her second escape, after going to Paris, she makes her way down to Marseille, which is the last point of entry, kind of a Casablanca type situation. Then it goes to Lisbon, and then Europe is closed. So her escape from there. And then her third escape, which is more of a psychological escape. And as we all know from reading Aristotle's Poetics, there's something about 3 acts that humans like that. So what did she do? This was a sad thing, very sad. Her father died of syphilis when she was 7 or 8 years old. And to die of syphilis when you're 7 or 8 years old in those days was really bad because it made you insane. And Dr. Ehrlich's magic bullet is the story of the German scientist, who was, I believe, also Jewish and won the Nobel Prize, who invented the cure for syphilis. But her father died and went insane, and there are stories. So what did she do after he died? A, she comforted her mother and said, let's face reality, he's dead. B, could you get all his books by Immanuel Kant down off the shelf? And C, she taught herself ancient Greek and started a Greek tragedy performance club, as most teens will do. But that was kind of an interesting thing, right? And it made for some interesting pictures. So amidst all of this, now I'm living in the world of Germany, interwar, Weimar Republic, the Roaring '20s, and I'm thinking, how did people not get syphilis all the time then, if it was so bad? Oh, there must have been this invention. Condoms must have been invented, right? And then for some reason, I don't know why, I just thought, I bet you a German Jew invented the condom. I don't know. It was one of those hunches, I bet you that was what happened. Yep. Julius from Poland, went to Berlin, took night school in chemistry, invented the modern condom, created a massive industry to such a large, now I'm sitting here writing this book, and I find out that this guy's in the circle, and very much so, and his thing is so pervasive, it becomes like, how you say when you're going to sneeze, get me a Kleenex? It became the generic term, not just for the condom, but for the whole act, the Fromm's act. Little sidelight, and there have been some things written about Julius Fromm. Again, these stories just keep spinning on. One of the first things the Nazis did when they really, really got power was they wanted that business. They took it from him, and they gave it to Hermann Goering's mother. And and Fromm left, pretty penurious, pretty poor, had to go to London. The color green. Green is a problem for artists. When I did this book talk with Roz Chast in New York, and we were talking, and we were in the green room, she said to me, "Why did you use green? Are you crazy? Nobody can work with green. Green isn't blue, and green's not red." So I was limited to one color in the book. And I'm trying to figure out well, there are a lot of colors in the world. Which one can I pick? And again, through the reading, she was called the woman in green. She liked to wear green when she was young. And then as I got to know more about her philosophy, she was all about natality or birth. And I thought, oh, green, spring. And then I didn't even know any of this stuff was going on. And then someone pointed out to me, yes, green is the color of birth for plants, but it's the color of decay for flesh. So it's a complicated color. And she's a complicated person. So that just worked out. Okay, so what about the drawing already? The funny pictures, sorry. So yeah, it's the part I love most too. In fact, all I wanted to do from the very beginning, from the get-go, was start drawing. But I held myself back for over 2 years. Because I subscribe to something that's called cartoon math. And that's a world where when you combine words and pictures, with due respect to all the people at the physics department down here, you get this equation. 1 + 1 = 3. The picture plus the words equals something that's larger than the sum of the parts. So from my years of doing New Yorker cartoons and gag cartoons, I learned that here's a little trick you can do. If you look at a New Yorker cartoon and you cover the picture, the caption shouldn't make any sense. If you cover the caption, the picture shouldn't make any sense. Only when you put those two together does it become that new thing that invites you in, and you complete the loop, and it's larger. So that's kind of how I was playing. So when I finally got down to drawing the book, I found that I had actually been rehearsing the drawings in my head a lot, and it went pretty fast. And I kind of have a sense of how pages should break up in rhythm, because I've done that a lot. So I had a pace and a feel. Now, I'm really going to let you guys in behind the curtain, as they said in The Wizard of Oz, and show you some of my missteps. Because I think, you've bothered to come here, I might as well show you my dirty laundry and see how I got there. So initially, you try and find your way in. So this was an early sketch, and I thought, I always wanted to make her very relevant so that she didn't seem like one of those statues. And I thought, well, I'll have her and Allen Ginsberg meet up at a party. And I did a lot of research, and I found out that, yes, in '58, when she was in New York, and this incident happened in the book, Ginsberg was also in New York. He had come back from, I think, Italy or England, and he had written Kaddish. And he was trying to promote his friend's work to publishers, and he was a very good friend of W.H. Auden, so they could have met. So I thought, wow, that's cool. And I liked the way the page was breaking up. So then I threw some dialogue in, which I won't bother reading to you right now. But he's talking about his struggles, and she comes back, and they're having this moment in the back of this party. It didn't work. It was too much. So then I thought of another way in. I wanted to show the diversity of the people in her world. And you can see, this is so early, I hadn't even really found her image yet. But I was going to do this is the Café Romaniche, and I was going to do a setting where all the people were there, but real, like Dietrich, and Günther Stern, her first husband, and made up, like Otto Levine, gangster, died in shootout with Gestapo. I mean, there were some of these were real or fabrications, and I thought, I'm going to make up some characters with real characters to give it a flavor. No. It just didn't feel right. It wasn't right. Then I thought, there's so many characters in the book. How are people ever going to make sense? So I went back to the more respected comics, EC, which is the one, and they always used to do this dramatis persona thing so you could follow. So now you can see I'm a little closer to Hannah, and there's her husband, bad drawing of Heidegger, her mom, St. Augustine. No, didn't need it. Didn't need it, didn't want it. I even made some beautiful drawings I was like, oh, that's going to really capture the mood. Threw it away. Didn't need it. But I'm working on these things, trying to figure out, and I guess what I was learning, that it's about the story. It's always the integrity of the story that she's fighting. I even did this really wonderful thing, and I spilled coffee on the floor to see how it goes, and I had her like zooming through her life to her youth. And it was a gorgeous piece, and I have it, and I love it. Couldn't use it in the book. Didn't need it. So here's a little example of how a page might develop. So this is so usually as I'm working, I typically work, this is called a 9-frame grid, and then sometimes I'll break it up into 6, but it just helps, it helps us. And this is a scene where we're talking about Walter Benjamin, who wrote this book called The Arcades Project, and basically liked walking around Paris. That's all he did. He just liked walking, which I love that method. It's like, I love doing that too. So I wanted to do a thing where I showed his feet big, violating the page. So I put all the text in, and then I roughed in where his feet might be. And I'm going to show you how it progressed to the end, just this page. So this is how it ended up. So it's kind of got the same integrity, but on the top I'm using like a pen and ink technique, and here I'm using him like walking toward you, and he's got a hole in his shoe because he's walking everywhere. And that's kind of his character. I mean, he would be the kind of guy that would have that. And then I superimposed this over a map of Paris from that era. You can kind of see it better in the book to show that he was just flaneuring around. He loved doing that. So to come back to this picture, which was vexing me, but I couldn't get it out of my head, and I didn't use a lot of photographs in the book. I think I used 2. It ended up being this. So, and while I'm not the Times Man of the Year, I do make the New York Times, now I'm not Time Magazine's Man of the Year. I do make the New York Times as the first woman full professor at Princeton. And she's thinking to herself, big deal. Was I the first human full professor at Princeton? And couldn't they have made my photo bigger? Because I'm trying to show she's a human. So here's a little, just another page of inking. You can see how here she is trying to talk her way out of the Gestapo prison, and the Zionists send the top lawyer in, and he says, pro bono, and he's bringing a piece of strudel from Romaniche, and she says, I don't need you, get out of here. You guys got me into this, and I've got this under control. Because she did, she talked her way out of the prison. So you can see how it's drawn, and then this comes back in, and that's kind of, and then I would get rid of that background. Okay, we're doing good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and take you through a scene. So you can see kind of how a fairly involved scene works, where I'm trying to break down, and one of the things that I wanted to do was show how the thought was connected to her life. Like the evolution of her thinking was connected to the dramas and things that she was going through in her life. But I wanted to do what we could do with pictures and drawings, like the graphic novel medium. So here we are in the third part. She's in New York, and she's stuck. In her book, The Origins of Totalitarianism, which came out in about 1953, she defined totalitarian states and how they happened. And it's a tremendous analysis of how Stalin and Hitler created this sort of totalitarianism. But now she's wrestling with an even bigger question. Why? Why do they happen? Like, I've shown how, but why? And I call this Walter stain, because I love a pun, and you'll see why. Origins lets us move uptown to a much nicer 5-room, 2-bath apartment in a doorman building with an elevator and partial river views. And any of you who've lived in New York know that jargon. It is from here that I decide to set up camp in my efforts to crack why the abyss happens. My headquarters is a couch. My method is studying a crack in the plaster ceiling overhead and debating with the only adversary I truly trust, Hannah versus Hannah. The abyss is real. Yes, but we're still in the world, but in a new place. How did we get here? Why? Yes, why? Tradition isn't just broken, it's shattered. It's had its head shaved, its soul crushed, its very existence marched into sealed chambers and exterminated. How can we still live? She hears, Hanashka. She yells at her husband, Blucher, I told you not to disturb me. Hanashka, up here. She looks up. What? A water stain on the ceiling over the couch in the shape of Walter Benjamin? Sholem always did say you were very visual. And you're talking? Uh-huh. So listen up. When a water stain in the shape of Walter Benjamin starts talking to you, you better pay attention. Go on. The reason you're not understanding why is because you're not free. You're a prisoner. But I'm just trying to do the philosopher's job to find the truth behind language, the origins of the shadows, to free us to understand all. Aha, there's the rub. Didn't you get what Sholem and I found in the Zohar way back in the early 20s? What the hell am I doing arguing with a water stain? And I knew that whitefish salad at lunch tasted funny. Hannah, focus. Sholem and I discovered that there is nothing behind language. Language is not a representation of a thing. The word is the thing itself. So what you're saying is, for example, the Hebrew word or doesn't just stand for light, it is light? Bingo. But that doesn't make sense. Since when do things have to make sense to be true? Making sense is the déformation professionnelle of philosophers. How does it work? Okay, think of it like this. And now we see her image projected on the ceiling. If you were the only person in the world, you would be able to predict the future perfectly. You think something, you do it, it's done. One tiny problem. You aren't alone. There are lots and lots of other people all over the place, and they're all saying different things and thinking different things and doing different things. Makes it kind of hard to predict the future, no? But what about two people who are in love? They know what each other is thinking. They're one. Good point. Lovers do have their own language, a connection beyond words. It's the private language Adam and Eve spoke before they were expelled from the garden. It's the private language of passion. But passion is real, Walter. You, above all people, must know that. Yes, passion exists, but its realm is private. The private space between lovers, family, true friends. But when people confuse the private language of passion with the public language of everyone talking to everyone in the public space, well, to use a technical phrase, all hell breaks loose. But why? You'll have to work that out. What in Christ do you think I'm doing on this couch? Hanashka, soon you will have a sign. A sign? What is this, a freaking Cecil B. DeMille biblical spectacular? When you get the sign, should you decide to act, you'll be tested. Your enemies will attack you, ignore them. Your friends will ignore you, let them go. But most harrowing, you'll come face to face with your captor. No matter what he says or does, and spoiler alert, it will be a he, you must not take your eyes off of his. Then you'll be free. Free to understand not just how the world collapses, but why. This test is imminent every second. The eternal ongoing present is the narrow portal through which the Messiah may enter at any time. In other words, Hanashka, pay attention. And she says, I didn't know you were religious. In other words, everything is connected. It's kind of what I'm feeling. So I go back to this drawing. I can't be for sure, but I think that's Hannah. I don't know, maybe looking a little heavy, top angle. But tell me it's not her, I think that could be her. Thank you. I'll take some questions. Yes, ma'am.
You talked about the why of Hannah, but
Yeah.
How did she come to your attention?
So she was always in my worldview. I used to go to the Brandeis book sale with my mother, who was actually here. She just schlepped me to it. And I pick up books, and I think once I picked up the Origins of Totalitarianism, because I thought it sounded like the kind of book I should read. So I carried it with me forever. And then, I had what I would call the typical NPR listener's knowledge of Hannah Arendt, or Banality of Evil, which I didn't really understand, but I thought was a cool word, Origins of Totalitarianism, and she smoked a lot. But I was trying to get something that connected complicated thought with pictures to make it simpler for people to understand, particularly philosophy. I wasn't a philosophy major, I'm a history major, but I wanted people to be able to understand it. So I looked at the University of Chicago, because we grew up, I grew up here, and as I've said, this was always like an island down here. So there was a lot of people who were philosophers and scientists and stuff down here, and when I opened Hannah's biography, it was like, oh my God, this person is like, everything about her was visual. The film, the Weimar, Fritz Lang, Max Beckmann, all those people. Every single part of her life, it was like petals of a flower unfolding, and soon I just wanted to have like dinner with her. So I had to do a book. Someone else? Challenge me. Yes.
I mentioned in the commentary on the program that she was deeply flawed,
Yes.
and I wondered if you could speak to that.
Yes. Well, she's human, and she'd be the first one to admit that she was flawed. And I think she made some things that she tended to act on facing reality, and things, whatever happened, she could get in trouble or get applauded for it. So there was that incident with Heidegger, which is more than an incident. And I address it in the book, and I had to wrestle with it. So for those of you who don't know, when she was a student, she studied with Martin Heidegger, who subsequently, it's come out over the years, was a pretty much of a Nazi, and came out very much during the war. And this haunted her, and her relationship with him was always troubling. I have had to address that. When she wrote Eichmann in Jerusalem, I call it the greatest case of too soon in human history, but I just recently reread Eichmann in Jerusalem, and it gave me pause. Like, I couldn't believe she was saying some of the things that she was saying. But I can understand, based on her life and what she saw, why she would try and propose that thinking is an antidote to terror. But again, subsequent to that, and I just tried to deal with things that could have happened to her in her life that she knew. I mean, one of the things that I really wanted to do in the book, in terms of making the biography, was not put things out of order and not have people be together that weren't alive or in the same space. Now, a lot of the incidents that I have are based on actual witnesses that saw these, but I don't know for sure that Louis Armstrong, for instance, was at the Romaniche, but he was touring Europe at that time. So, I tried to show what was happening to her at the time. She did recant on a couple of instances. But it's interesting, I was talking to someone here at the University of Chicago who was a student of Leo Strauss, another eminent person down here. And he said to me that Strauss had followers. A lot of philosophers had followers, acolytes, She didn't. She didn't have a school. So she wrestled with, how do we get on as people in the world? So out of this came, she was very much aware of her Jewish identity. She said, I can't help it. I was born a Jew. I can't change it. That's who I am. That's my identity. But I will be careful about dealing with emotion in this space. So I tried to show how she would have shown it, how she would have lived it. But she also, another thing that was a big part of her philosophy in terms of the fact of how we live is we make promises, but inevitably we screw up, so we have to forgive people. And she says, without forgiveness, there would be we'd be just stuck. We'd stop. So yes, she was flawed. She was a snob, self-confessed, but she also loved watching TV and martinis, whatever. So yeah, question, sir. There, then, yeah.
Thank you for your presentation. I'd like to ask you, you're obviously a very thoughtful man and talented. The concept of simplifying word and image and bringing it into everyday life, as you presented, requires a lot of intelligence and talent. My question is, how do we, as myself, as not as talented, I see the value of the simplified image with word. We put out so much images on Facebook or Instagram or whatever. Many times we don't connect them to words, or we have tie-drabs of blogs or something with a lot of words but no images. How can we, as just ordinary citizens, combine this graphic element in our lives?
Well, thank you for your kind words. So again, I find myself in my life, after having ingested the Hannah Arendt virus, everything kind of comes back. So one of the things that she said is we have to avoid cliches. So they're fine sometimes, like, yeah, you rock, you know, if it's with somebody. But if it's something that you want to really get a little piece of yourself out there, rewrite it. Think about it. Images are super powerful, and they're very valid. And you kind of have to, you know, we all have a self-editing process. And I think, you know, again, the way I kind of think about it is, I call it swim in the sea of good. You know, like look at good photographs, look at magazines or things that have good captions, and then you can do it. I mean, we're all capable of it. Maybe, you know, sometimes look at that Instagram post and that caption and say, I've got a rule. I'm going to wait 2 minutes before I send it and look at it again. It will get better. I hope that helps. Yeah.
We have
Yes?
time for a couple more questions. We're going to take one right in the back
got
over
one over
here.
here.
I'm sorry. This
then
and
one
this
right
guy
up
has
here.
to.
Yeah.
He's patiently waiting
Go right
here.
up here.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I defer to the referees.
There are a lot of allusions to Kabbalah in your presentation. I was wondering if you thought that Arendt was something of a Kabbalist.
Wow, that's a huge question, and I would love someone to write a book about it, so I could find out. But I do know that Benjamin was, because his buddy Gershon Scholem was, and I read their correspondence when they were like 14 in Berlin, and I've never read anything smarter from anyone at any age than these two 14-year-olds writing about the Kabbalah in Berlin. I mean, there mustn't have been a lot to do. But I do think there is an element of mysticism. I do think, you know, she gets, at certain points of her thinking, she kind of says that if we go with the flow and do what we think is right, and she thinks we learn about history, and one of the things that was so great about this, and as I said, we bring people back in their stories, because from their stories we learn about life, not from equations. And there's a magical nature of when a story, you know, like connects, that is, I think, personally, a little bit of a mystical thing. I don't know if it's, you know, Kabbalah is like a big question, so I don't know that. I don't know if she addressed it, but I do know that Benjamin and Scholem were really into it.
We have time for this one final question.
Oh, wait, I want to get him too. Can we squeeze him in? He's
2 more questions.
Thank you for your lecture.
Yeah.
I want to know if you felt that Hannah reached her fulfillment in life.
Yeah, well, no, what that means is no, because actually, and yes, because she died when she died, but there was an amazing little thing. So if you read the book, spoiler alert, I'll give you the end, but it doesn't really ruin the book. So she renounced philosophy, right? She goes to dinner on early December in 1975 to her great friend Sella Baron's house, and expires with a smile on her face. They go to her apartment the next day. On her typewriter is the first page of her return to philosophy on judgment. And from what I can see, a lot of people are like, damn it, why didn't she finish that? So, yes and no. Yeah.
And we have our last question in
Yes,
the back.
sir.
I was just curious, you seem to have a lot of admiration for her, and you become fond of her over time. Do you find that you made her in some places look better than she might have been, or were there things that would have reflected poorly on her that you might have left out and think, wow?
That's a great question. Yeah, I mean, I left out good things and I left out bad things. I left out her relationship with Karl Jaspers, which I wish I could have done, because everything that I've gotten from him and her is like amazing. But I left out the Literat controversy. You can't put everything in there. I tried to balance. I tried to make it balanced. But I will confess, I was smitten with her. But also her dark sides. And, she always challenged me. So she did things, and I was always like, would I have the courage to do that? Or would I be as bold to do that? So it is an editing process, a reductive process, but I tried to be not fair and balanced, but fair and balanced and unfair. Sorry, I think
Yeah, unfortunately, that is all the
maybe
time
we
have
can
questions
talk
for
later.
today. Yeah, just a reminder, we will be doing book sales right outside the front door and book signing up on the 10th level. Let's thank Ken one more time
Thank
for
you.
joining us.